And welcome everybody to our in-depth analysis of solar activity. We've got a coronal mass ejection and lots more to cover in our in-depth fields and features segment. We've seen coronal mass ejections occur. They are Earth-directed. We've also seen sunspot 2962 grow as we forecasted. Here's the last 4 hours of magnetohydrodynamic pressure around planet Earth out to about 12 Earth diameters. We will see a little uptick right here. There's a little uptick in the solar wind speed and plasma temperature reflected in the Geospace Magnetosphere movie. There's another little wave coming in, and we've seen mainly a subsiding of the solar wind over the past 24 hours. We'll get to it momentarily. First, Earth's magnetic moment from the ground. Since we showed you Earth's magnetic moment from space, here are ground magnetic perturbations in nanotesla magnetic flux density. Like the last video, that's 4 hours of data. Changes in Earth's B field, known as Geospace Delta B, courtesy University of Michigan. And let's continue on. GOES magnetometers here showing a little higher lows, maybe a tighter range there in the GOES magnetometers, as we see solar cycle 25 progressing. Let's take a look at the heliospheric current sheet. Earth remains in a south pole current sheet. It looked like a north pole current sheet was headed this way, but now we see some additional activity in the northern hemisphere. So we may see a new sunspot rising, as well as the increasing complexity of sunspot 2962. That's this one right up here. And here's the line of sight view and solar magnetogram of that same data, essentially. And if you're wondering where it comes from 51 ground-based solar magnetometers here on Earth. Also magnetometers on stereo A here at Lagrange 5 and stereo B here at Lagrange 4. Next, the coronal hole line of sight plot. This shows the sun's B field in blue. Those blue lines there, those are the sun's B field lines. It's also showing you coronal holes. And we see some diffuse coronal holes here in south pole polarity. Southern polarity coronal holes here rotating in, stretching across the equator. Not super well defined yet at the moment. Here's a visual of it in 193 angstroms from the SDO. Now, the coronal mass ejection we're going to talk about momentarily came from this active region here, another prime example of not requiring flares or sunspots to see coronal mass ejections. We've covered it repeatedly on the channel. Low the past few years. And congratulations on realizing the channel exists. Let's move to sunspots. Since we've seen yet another forecast come true, sunspot 2962 has grown as we forecasted yesterday. So, likelihood of large solar flares, quite high, still over 50%, as we've got multiple beta-class sunspot groups. Sunspot 2957 and 61 have largely degraded a little bit here over the past 24. 2958 has decayed to plage, as far as I can tell. 2960 has been mostly stable, and 2962 has grown a little bit since yesterday. Also, there is another active region here behind 2962, which may be a sunspot. What do you think? Let us know in the comments if you think that'll be a sunspot. And let's take a look at this in 1700 angstroms. There's your full disk view. You will see a little bit of growth here in sunspot 2962. And YouTube viewers, make sure you check out our Twitch channel. We live streamed our previous video. You'll see only one video on YouTube today. The rest will be either on Twitch or on BitChute. We'll have live streamed 3/4 of our videos. This will be the only YouTube exclusive. Let's look at the close-up of the southern hemisphere that we took. There you go. There's the southern hemisphere. Little bit of degradation at sunspot 2957 and 2961. Mostly stable. 2960, mostly stable. Let's go to the northern hemisphere. And here's the north. You'll see a little bit of growth in sunspot 2962. and barely any evidence of the coronal mass ejection that came out of this active region here. Former sunspot 2958, I believe, was the name of that one. So here's the X-ray flux over the past 3 days. Just a couple C-class intensifications here, mainly occurring yesterday. This looks like only a B-class. That's a B8.9. Barely even a flare, as background levels are approaching C-class X-ray output from the closest star. No relativistic particles showing up. No surprises there. Let's go to the real-time solar wind, which we've just seen a little uptick in, actually. So the solar wind made it all the way down to about 460 kilometers per second. Now it's popped back up. Current conditions are more like 480 kilometers per second. Solar wind is quite diffuse at only about 4 protons per cubic centimeter. Little minor changes in the plasma temperature also. A consistent negative BZ, but a fairly weak field not producing any real geomagnetism. So the measurement of global geomagnetism is expressed as the planetary K index. KP1 is the current situation. Geomagnetic calm conditions. Let's take a look at the solar system. This is where your heavenly bodies are currently located. Let's advance this 1 week. Earth is getting a little lonely here as Venus and Mercury speed away to the opposite side of the solar system. Let's forecast a week. Here's where things will be on the 14th. We'll have a gibbous waxing moon as we approach our next full moon. Next, a star chart. This is what's going on above my head in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. You've got Mars and Venus side by side on the ecliptic. Saturn and Mercury rising ahead of the Sun, and Jupiter almost overlapping the Sun there. The blue line is the galactic plane. And the yellow line is the ecliptic. Let's move this back up. My star chart faces the south. I'm currently facing the south, and so does my couch. Face the south. So next, looking at the coronal mass ejection, which is earthly directed, we'll look at the view from stereo A at Lagrange 5 and the LASCO SOHO C3 at Lagrange point 1 in between Earth and Sun. Now from this perspective, Earth would be off behind you. And from this perspective, Earth would be off to your right. And you're going to see some plasma head right down that arrow. So this is an Earth-facing coronal mass ejection, folks. We can expect some geomagnetic unrest or maybe a minor geomagnetic storm from this. The plasma is looking fairly diffuse. However, it is quite earthly directed. So if you look at the view from the LASCO C3, you can see a halo, essentially. The only CME we're really seeing here is on the earthly side, and that's quite a lot of plasma headed right down the pipe toward planet Earth. So that's what we've got to say about that. We can expect some geomagnetic effects from that in about 3 days. Thanks for tuning in. I've been your host, Dan, a.k.a. Smash-O-Mash. Wishing that solar wind remain at your back as I sign off from the Smash News Network, least busted name in news.